pressure, I guess, Mr. Buckley. I think you're ready. Is that what I just heard?
Function of the back.
I think we're just going to we hear you, Patrick.
Get to call your name. I think you guys before.
She's here.
Excellent.
All right, I know the school committee just called its meeting to order, the select board and the finance committee.
Call this meeting to order.
I have that at 6:38 p.m. Thank you, everybody, for coming out on a cold night. I know it was busy out on your way in here, so appreciate your flexibility for tonight's joint meeting of the select board, finance committee, and school committee to review the annual revenue and expense plan strategy. For anybody who does not know, my name is Michael Gilberto. I'm the town administrator here in North Reading. To my left is Marty Galvin, who is the finance director, the assistant superintendent for finance and operations, Michael Conley, and superintendent of schools, Patrick Bailey. I do want to say thank you to Michael, Patrick, and the school committee for allowing us to use this room this evening. Appreciate that. I think it seemed to be a successful venue in the past. So the four of us are up in the front here on behalf of the financial planning team for tonight's presentation. The members of that team are seated with their respective boards for the presentation. But we have a PowerPoint presentation as we customarily do. And our hope here this evening was to go through the slides. I think everybody should have a paper copy, and if you don't, there are some up in the front here that I'd encourage folks to just follow along with. Just mark the slide when you may have a question, and at the end we'll come back for questions. Tonight's meeting is not a public hearing. The boards that are in front of me here are convened public meetings because there is a quorum of each of them here. The idea is to allow for questioning from members of the school committee, select board, and finance committee, and to the extent that time may allow, to entertain questions from the public as well. This is only a meeting in person. It's being recorded by NORCAM for a broadcast at a later date. It's also being recorded using Google Meets, so it'll be available for the public to see. So with that, if there aren't any other introductory items, I will go into the presentation.
One quick point of order. Housekeeping, do you guys need mics?
There's no mics.
If NORCAM's.
There's no mics. It's just picking it up off the shotgun.
Okay.
So we can just pass that all the way to the back to the Okay, so I'll get started. Thank you. So the goal for tonight is to review the role of the financial planning team somewhat briefly, to review the revenue allocation process that the financial planning team follows on an annual basis, and to provide an opportunity for the members of the school committee, select board, and finance committee to both ask questions and engage in discussion. So you see up here the membership of the financial planning team. It's representatives from the three boards that are here in the room, as well as the professional staff that assists and works for those boards. We meet generally monthly. We may take a month off for a meeting in the summer, and then more than that as we're leading into the budget presentation. And over the years, a number of folks who are not currently on the financial planning team but are in the room have served in that role as well as representatives. So our annual budget goals, and I kind of put this disclaimer at the beginning, notwithstanding any charter or bylaw provision, because this is an informal entity that's been set up by what I believe to be mutual agreement by the school committee, the select board, finance committee. I suspect that there's no clear delineation of its establishment in a charter or bylaw. In fact, I know that there isn't. And the process that's followed may not directly align with some of the 1969-70 charter provisions that govern town meeting and budget formulation. So recognizing that, our goal is to continue the budget collaboration between municipal and school leaders through the financial planning team. We review and adjust revenues with an eye on generating free cash to help maintain our bond rating and to fund certain expenses in the following fiscal year. And we've listed some of those items there. They should look familiar to most folks. Snow and ice, capital projects, one-time retirement costs, and transfers where we set aside funds to our various stabilization funds. The financial planning team looks to maintain level services for our municipal and school departments to the extent possible. They highlight areas of concern, whether it be service needs or financial pressure that's forecast, as was the case during the spring of last year, and ultimately propose a balanced budget for the Select Board, School Committee, and Finance Committee to submit to town meeting. A little bit of history, again, that disclaimer up on the top. The approach dates back to the early 2000s, and there are folks in the room who are familiar with that, as a means for the elected and appointed officials to have a single unified budget to go to town meeting. Beginning in fiscal year 2020, which was discussions taking place in the spring of 2019, there were adjustments that were made to the way that costs were allocated from a single fixed cost category, and we'll get into that a little bit later, to unallocated and allocated fixed costs. And it also to ensure that certain revenues, most notably ambulance fees, the trash fee, and cemetery fees, would directly offset municipal expenses. Again, there'll be more on that in future slides. I'm not sure if someone else has got the Zoom going, but if you could just mute that, that would be helpful. Okay. So, Patrick, do you have a...
I'm good.
David, no? Okay. So that was the first section of the presentation. The next section was to go into revenue allocation. And I will, at this point, turn it over to the Finance Director, Lori Galvin, to take us through some of the narrative and some of the numbers that go into the allocation. So with that, Lori.
So there are four main sources of revenue. You have your property taxes, state aid, local receipts, and other financing sources. The property taxes are our largest source of revenue. They are subject to the constraints of Proposition 2.5, which limits the annual growth to 2.5% plus new growth. While this does ensure that taxpayers are protected from increases, it does restrict the flexibility of municipalities against rising costs. So this is our FY25 and 26 projection of 25, our actual budget set by June town meeting, and through the tax levy that and the new growth that the assessor calculates. So as you can see, a couple notable items. The new growth for 2025 was a sizable amount, mostly because of 104 Lowell Road or Martin's Landing, a few buildings coming on. It's projected to decrease for 2026 because right now it will be essentially one building. So the combined new growth is budgeted at $880,000 for FY26, but as you can see, it's going to decline. We're projecting $750,000 for 2027, but once the last building is built at Martin's Landing, there will not be any more new growth from that area. So it's been a sizable amount, but it does, impact us going forward because it was such a large piece. Then the other notable increase is the debt exclusion. You can see it went from $815,000. This is non-middle school, high school, from $815,000 down to $127,650. What's happening is the debt is retiring associated with certain projects. It's over, so the revenue source dries up, but fortunately at the same time the debt service expense dries up. So the overall increase in our tax levy is to 2.65%. The next area is our state aid. This is distributed by the state of Massachusetts. It includes the Chapter 70 education aid and certain reimbursements for different types of exemptions like veterans exemptions and things like that. It is unfortunately subject to legislative appropriation and economic fluctuations, so it is unpredictable at times. This is our state aid projections, our actual 2025 and our projected 2026. The only piece for right now that we've increased for 2026 is the first item. There is a minimum per pupil increase that happens every year, so it's a total of about $65,000. We will update these numbers as soon as the governor releases the state aid proposal. And then the overall increase you can see is only 0.64, but that's because we only are projecting the minimal increase right now. So the reason we're only projecting the minimal increase is this is our historical state aid increase. You can see how much it is varied. So the average increase is only 1.82%. So we're really reluctant to over budget or over project at this time. The next element is our local receipts. It includes things like excise taxes, field tax, our departmental revenue, fees, permits, and investment income. Because it's based basically on economic trends, it is the least predictable revenue source. Some of the sources are set in state law, like the motor vehicle excise, the amounts, the fee, or the assessment per thousand valuation of a vehicle is set by the state, so we can't modify certain things. Others can be set at levels to fully cover associated costs, things like the trash fee. But a widely adopted strategy is to project no more than 90% of the prior year's actual receipts. The excess bolsters free cash, and shortfalls would reduce free cash. So just a reminder, free cash is not free money. It is a state finance term for part of the undesignated fund balance. And basically what it is it reflects money that's left over from the previous year's budget, either revenues in excess of budgeted or expenditures that were less than what was budgeted. So these are projected local receipts. 25 is the actual budget, and 26 is projected. At this time, most of the items are just level funded. You will see that the investment income for 2025 is slightly more than the investment income for 2026, and that's only because we had a few small adjustments we had to make on the state recap sheet. When we set the tax rate, there's a state form that we have to fill out, and all the modes of calculations that go through it. Sometimes little adjustments are made to make it balance. But the other thing you will know is that we do not budget the investment income for the sale of town-owned land, which is the poultry funds. The reason we don't budget that is it provides a buffer against like falling interest rates, and it helps to prevent those funds from being absorbed into the operating budget, because if you count on them one year and you say it's $1 million and then the next year it drops off, your operating budget pays the price. You have to make up that difference either by cutting your expenditures or finding a different revenue source. So when interest rates are volatile, we don't overestimate. Over budgeting investment income in high interest rate years becomes an obstacle to balancing your budgets once interest rates fall, and any unbudgeted investment income flows to free cash and bolsters our bond rating. So as you can see, right now we have a slight decline in our projected local receipts. So this shows the historical trend of our budget versus actual of estimated receipts. 2021 was about 2.2 million. It dropped in 22 to about 1.8. Can you read that? And then 2023 looks great at close to 5 million, but that was the year we had the settlement on the middle school, high school suit. So that money had to flow to free cash per Department of Revenue rules. So that was $2.7 million that really more or less inflated our free cash. And then this past year, 2024, we closed out with close to $3 million. So over the past 4 years, the town's revenue estimates have generated about $9.3 million in free cash, which does not include that middle school, high school settlement. But over that period, it's about $2.3 million per year. You know, in some respects, it seems like a lot of money, but when it comes to free cash, we're supposed to have 3.5% to 5% of our operating budget. That's what the bond rating agencies look at. So they expect you to have that in order to maintain the bond rating. So the more you become reliant on just generating free cash from revenues as opposed to having expense turnbacks in tighter years, it's not really too much money when you consider the 3.5% to 5%.
Can I just stop you right there for a second? And just, so I want to emphasize this point. Can you describe what happens if we drop too far down and our bond rating goes down?
Our borrowing costs on all of our capital projects, building projects increase.
Right. So costs go up
Right.
across the board.
So the last category of revenue is our other financing sources. These things include such items as our special revenue fund, which is our cell tower revenue, ambulance receipts, cemetery perpetual care. Some of the items are used to directly offset related expenses. Then transfers from our stabilization funds and free cash for unexpected expenses or one-time outlays, and then transfers from our enterprise funds. The strategic use of these resources provides us some flexibility and helps us maintain stability during unforeseen challenges. So for 2025, you can see that we used just over $2 million, and mostly those are transfers from some of our reserve accounts and stabilization funds. We're only anticipating 1.6 in 26 right now. The funds, the capital improvement stabilization is funded from free cash. When we have free cash that it's not used directly for capital projects and snow and ice and different things, we put those remaining funds in the capital improvement stabilization. Then we use a portion of that, and in general the agreed upon amount was 1.3 million, as long as the debt service is as high as 1.3 million. For the non-exempt debt, we use the capital improvement stabilization to fund the debt service. So what happens is, if we do not have funds in the capital improvement stabilization, the operating budgets would have to absorb the debt service. We cannot not pay our debt, so it would directly impact operating budgets if we had to absorb what is currently funded from the capital improvement stabilization. Then the PFA stabilization is a stabilization fund that is generated for our health insurance. In years that the health insurance increase is greater than 8.5%, we withdraw from that fund. Right now, we do not have an estimate on what the increase will be. We're using 8.5 right now in our projection, but like last year, it started out in double digits, probably 13, might have even been as high as 16%. And between negotiations and using the PFA stabilization, we fund 70%. The other portion came out of the employee share. So our share was $195,000 that we used to bring it back down to 8.5. So with all of that, the combined available revenue for 2025 was $82 million. It will be $83 million, $83.5 basically, for 2026. So as you can see, it's only an increase of 1.6%. So it's not even the 2.5% that the levy is allowed. It's only 1.6 currently projected. And you can see each piece as a percentage of the total. On the flip side of that are our expenses. Okay.
You're up.
Let's take over. I'll let you explain them.
Sure, that's okay, that's fine. So we have 4 categories of expenses, and some of you who've been part of the budget process for a long time may remember it being 3 categories, and when we talked about it in the context of the budget in the spring, we talked about it in 3 categories. We talked about shared expenses, municipal operating expenses, and school operating expenses. But there's a little bit of fine print with regard to that in terms of how we split up the shared expenses, and I'll talk a little bit about that now. So we start at the top, for those who prefer a picture more than anything else, we have the revenue that Gloria just went through and described. And then we have what we call our unallocated fixed costs or shared costs. So those are things that the town is required bills that the town is required to pay, that the school and municipal budgets really don't have any impact on one year over the next. They're a defined amount. Debt service is probably the biggest component of that. It doesn't change depending upon how the operating budget is approved from one year to the next. It changes only through a vote at town meeting on a capital project. So those are sort of taken off the top, if you will, from the big pot of revenue within the limits of Proposition 2.5. Then we have what's left after that occurs, which is available municipal and school revenue. And there's an allocation, and it's, I'm going to say, 66, 67%, 33, 34% allocated. There's an exact percentage that's out there. It goes out to 8, 9, or 10 decimal points. And the reason for that is because it's such a big number that any little adjustment of a tenth or a hundredth of a decimal point has a big impact. But that being said, it's roughly 2/3, 1/3 that we're talking about. It has been for a long time. That's not uncommon to see in a town of our size. The available municipal and available school funds are, become that amount. So if we're using round numbers, and the overall budget was $133 million, and it was $33 million in unallocated fixed costs, there'd be $100 million left, and we would split it, $66 million, $34 million. The numbers are actually smaller because the operating budget is smaller. So we then, for both the school and municipal budgets, deduct from their share, municipal or school, the allocated fixed costs that go along with it. So the biggest component of that is health insurance, and it happens to be one of the things that increases at the greatest percentage as well, and Lorianne's going to get to that. That leaves us with the available municipal revenue and available school revenue after that exercise happens. There's other categories that Lorianne will go through. And that's sort of the funding that's available for the select board and the school committee to work within to try to identify and come up with a balanced budget. And within, everything on, below the arrows that you see there, there's some ability to impact fixed costs. So if you have fewer positions, you have less health insurance costs, for example. It frees up funding that's available for the operating budgets. So I'm not going to read through all of the definition here. Hopefully my summary sort of describes it, but it's in the handout that's there, and I encourage you to take a look at it. And I would just note that in 2020, that's one of the things that changed. All of the fixed costs were together in one bucket. They were taken off the top, and what was left was split 66-34. In 2019, for fiscal year 2020, the financial planning team agreed to propose that instead, where there are costs that can be allocated specifically to the school departments, specifically to the municipal departments, that be done below the line. So that was a change that took place at that point in time. So I'm not going to read every word on the page here. That you see the fixed costs that we're talking about. They're described in here. I think it's more important we talk about the numbers, so I'll turn it back over to Lorianne, and she can kind of give you an overview of what that means in terms of the categories.
So as you can see, the categories of the unallocated costs are things like the regional school, the debt service, the provision for abatements and exemptions, general liability insurance, and post-employment benefits. On some of these, we have the actual assessments, like the Northeast Regional School Capital, we have the actual figure for 2026. The debt service is an estimate based on, we have a number of projects we haven't borrowed yet going permanent on those items, so we do try to make a projection based on the capital that we have and how much the departments are going to spend and how much we need to borrow to cover those particular expenditure timelines. To do that, the cherry sheet offsets are something that's related to state aid, so those are set by the state. So just like we level funded the state aid, we level funded the cherry sheet offsets for right now. Revision for abatements, we increased it a little bit based on these increased activity in the senior rebate or senior work-off program. The general liability funds, we make a prediction each year. You know, some of these we might say, okay, every year on average they increase by 3.5%. Every year they increase by 8.5%. Those types of things. We take a historical average as the basis of our first line projection. Then as we start to get numbers, like if the health insurance comes out in February, we'll update that number. If general liability comes out in March, you know, if we get actual numbers, then we update these as the time goes by. But one thing to note, it looks like our unallocated fixed costs went down. It went from 11.3 to 10.8. The biggest item on that is the exempt debt declined. And just like you saw the revenue piece of the debt exclusion drop off, this is the debt service on those excluded projects has finished. So right now it looks like an overall decrease of 4.8%. But again, some of the numbers we don't quite have yet. So within the unallocated costs, there are certain things that we've historically funded from free cash. One was capital plan funding. There was a time where we were going to try to fund $250,000 a year within the operating budget to set aside money for our capital projects. The snow and ice deficit, if the storms are such that what we spend is more than what we typically budget in a year, then we have to raise that deficit, or we would have to, it would impact budgets come the fall when we go to set the recap sheet. You have to come up with funding for your snow and ice deficit. And then there's like one-time costs of when certain employees retire, their buyout costs. So we've been funding those things from free cash. But again, if free cash isn't generated, these would have to be absorbed by the operating budget. So as you can see, it was $574,000 that we funded with free cash in 25. We're projecting $900,000, mostly because the snow and ice it can be so drastic. One year it was $500,000, and the next year it was like $250,000. So it really depends on storms, and you know, it's on. We plan on a higher number so we don't get into trouble. So the calculation of the annual operating budget, as Mike mentioned, we take the total revenue that you saw between the taxes, state aid, local receipts, and other financing sources. And then we take the unallocated fixed costs and subtract those, creating an amount available that will be split for the municipal and school costs. The amount available is split roughly 33 or 34 to 66, 67% for the school. And this is the budget distribution, how it would look for projected for 26, but this is the actual 25. You see, if you take the total revenue for 25 was 82 million. The unallocated fixed cost was 11 million. That left 70,853,000. The municipal share left 23,461,000. But then the fixed costs that were allocated to just the town, like the health insurance, public safety disability, and certain other things, the municipal share of the Middlesex County retirement, you have to deduct 5.8 million. Then on the municipal side, there are certain revenue offsets that we add back, like the trash fee, the transfer for ambulance that funds part of the fire department, the water indirect costs that fund several departmental costs within general government. If you add that back, the final revenue available for municipal budgets is $20,187,000. Similarly, when you do the school department, they're 25, the 66-ish% was 47 million. Their fixed costs, again, their health insurance, portion of Middlesex County, and other costs is 8.2 million. That left them with 39 million. So as you can see, the municipal revenue available is only an increase of 1.1%, and the municipal revenue available for the school operation is only 1.6%. This shows you all the fixed costs on the municipal side. And as you can see, we've forecasted 8.5% increase for health insurance. Middlesex County, I believe that's an actual number, I believe we already got those numbers, 6.5%, workers' comp 4%, as it's a percentage of, or it's based on total salaries. Life insurance, Medicare is a percentage of salaries, and public safety, disability, and uninsured medical are costs that are set aside on the municipal side. So costs, fixed costs on the town side, in comparison to revenue this is before that these costs are subtracted, was only went up 2.6%, the fixed costs went up 7%. So this describes the revenue offsets that are added back on the municipal side. We have the trash fee. Sometimes we have a transfer from the trash stabilization fund. We have transfers from cemetery and perpetual care, which directly fund part of the DPW budget. Ambulance reserve funds fire. Water indirect funds a number of pieces. It can fund a piece of the health insurance budget for, it can fund part of, say, my salary for work that I do. So if you look at the town meeting warrant, under each department, it will show a transfer from water. And recreation, there's a transfer for some of their costs, like their Medicare and different things. So these are the actual amounts that are added back. We're currently projected for 2026. So right now, the water, we generally forecast an increase of 2.5%. So overall, right now, the projection is it's only going to go up the total of 0.5%, which leaves total municipal revenue available of $20,408,000, which is 1.1. Then similarly on the school side, if you take 66% of the revenue before the allocated fixed costs are subtracted, it's a 2.6% increase. But then once you subtract all of their allocated fixed costs, which increased 7.5%, they're left with an increase of 1.6%.
Just one thought here that I forgot to bring up this morning. Add backs on the school side would be fees. There are fees charged for athletics, for busing, for other things as well. So just like the municipal has add backs, the school sort of has add backs in the form of fees that are charged to parents or students for various things.
But don't they, isn't that done in a different form of calculation than offset?
It does offset our operating budget request ultimately, the ones that we budget for. It's outside the revenue plan, like
Okay.
some of our federal state grants.
So we just request less from it then, okay?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing.
So this is the summary of what really happens. So for the municipal side, the 2026 projected available revenue increase is 1.1%. Our anticipated level service request increase percentage is 3.58%. On the school side, Their projected revenue increase is 1.62%, but their level services needs have an increase of 5.6%.
I just want to go back to before we go off into discussion. First is just, again, to highlight everything that we're talking about within the municipal operating budget in this discussion falls within the limits of Proposition 2.5. And just to make clear, the one thing that doesn't is that asterisk line of debt service exempt. So when that number goes down from 5.6 million to 5.020 million, there's a direct reduction in the tax bill. So the debt service that we're paying in that amount is no longer passed through. It doesn't become available for expenditure for any other purpose unless authorized by town meeting and by a ballot vote, either for an override or for a debt exclusion for a particular process. So that money doesn't become available to be utilized to balance the operating budget. I think most folks know that, but I do feel it's important to just really stress that fact. And then the other thing I just wanted to highlight is just with regard to fixed costs. The real big driver, if you look on this, it's not what that shows, I'm sorry. We look at the unallocated fixed costs and what they leave available on the third line there for amount available for municipal and school. We're at that 2.64%, which is only 0.01% less than I think showed up in the overall revenue. So the unallocated fixed costs are, again, largely because of the decrease in the debt service are going down. But what's available, as you can see, is consumed, mostly by that 8.5% for health insurance. Again, that's admittedly a steady, what we feel is conservative estimate. And in some years, we've been able to realize that we only need 1% or 2% of that. And in others, like last year, I think it started at 19 or 18%, went down to 12%. So it can widely vary, but you see what it does in terms of the pressure that it puts on.
And when the health insurance number comes down, it's a combination of negotiation and the use of the
PFA. Negotiation first with the carrier. We've tried to go to the market with mixed results and depending upon the year. Last year, we used $192,000 from the PFA to stabilize, and that's the money that had been set aside over 5 or 6 fiscal years at this point in time. So it's there for that purpose to be used to stabilize. So that can help, and that is not accounted for here, to be clear. We could make a policy decision through the budget process to withdraw from the stabilization fund and try to further reduce the health insurance costs and make more funds available for the municipal operating budgets. So I think we wanted to sort of,
So one thing, I mean, to the point Richard was just making, budgets are a snapshot, right?
Yes.
It's what you know at that moment in time. And I want to sort of bring it back just for a second and say, there have been a number of points in here where we said, well, revenue could go up depending on what the state does, costs could go up depending on what health insurance goes. I mean, there's some variability here, so just so people listening have an understanding that there's no one here, or I think most of the people here don't have an expectation of like, well, this is the exact number that we're going to end with. There will be some percentage up or down depending on how those variables play out through the course of the fiscal year.
it's absolutely correct.
And it's tough, and from what you guys have said quite accurately, it's tough to say, oh, on average, it will go up by this or down by that because market conditions change every year for all of this things. So, again, for people listening, it's tough to say, this is the exact number and or this is the variability of that number. But, I mean, it's not to say it's all rolling dice, but it's conservative, educated guesses.
And to some extent, that uncertainty persists up until and even past the June town meeting.
It does.
Obviously, at June town meeting, we have perhaps a much more precise estimate than we have here, but even that is an estimate. We don't know the future.
That's right. We generally don't get a final cherry sheet state aid number until late July or early August.
So just in relation to the health insurance cost, I mean, over the years, we've been using different percentages for budgetary purposes. For years it was 7.5%. Years before that it was much lower, 4.5%, 5%. But as we get, as we found, the while we use the PFA stabilization fund to stabilize the rates and plug the holes at times, we took $195,000 last year. What we have done and have to do in order to keep up with the rising cost is to increase the percentage, because that premium base that we're working off of this year increases, say, by 12% last year. We only budgeted 8.5, but we used the PFA to stabilize the rate and the impact on the taxpayers. But then we incrementally have to increase that 8.5% to 9%, and continue to grow that incrementally, rather than having a huge swings in the premiums. This PFA model that we're using has allowed us to build up enough reserves to stabilize it a bit, rather than having huge swings. Like I said, last year it started off in the high teens as far as estimates, and ended up at around 12%, which is a substantial number. But while we only budgeted like 7.5 last year, now we're 8.5. So again, we'll have to continue to raise the level that we're budgeting to ensure that the stabilization of the rates that are realized using the stabilization fund to do it incrementally rather than huge steps. So it's a challenge every year. And it's been a long time since we've seen health insurance rates decrease.
What is the timeline when you would know the actual rate for health insurance?
So we normally get an initial renewal in late January or early February. And then from there, we make a decision about whether to directly negotiate. Depending upon how challenging that renewal rate is, we go to market and see what's out there. One year we had a lot of interest from other carriers to come sign on with the town. We opted not to make a move. And then the next year, one of them said they weren't interested at all, which I was, I think, all shocked by that response, given how aggressive they were. But late January or February is what we get. It starts to come into clarity. We normally try to finalize by mid-March-ish.
If I'm not mistaken, the other carriers might not be interested in the PFA, and/or we wouldn't be able to get it back into that.
That's correct. So the PFA, or the participating funding arrangement, we may be one of two communities statewide that have the program in effect. We've had it here for, I think it's 6 years now, maybe 7. And we've been told by most carriers that they're not overly interested in it. At one point, we had heard that another carrier was interested, played that sort of favorably to negotiate a more favorable rate. And that's something that we're monitoring. I mean, I think we feel like the PFA has been successful, but I think if we still goes in front here, are cautious in making sure that we're doing, right by all of our employees and not just following a process because we're in a process. So we're trying to keep our eye on what alternatives might be out there. And as pressure grows on the budget, we're going to have to be more open-minded to, I think, other
You
solutions.
made indicative rates that, like, if we didn't have BFA, what would your proposal be, kind of thing?
So we could do that, and we do see that in the baseline renewal that Blue Cross provides to us, because the PFA is reinsuring that. So we get an indication of what it looks like. And unfortunately, the past, it's either 2 or 3 years, it's been our claims that have been the biggest obstacle. And so, the couple of years of bad claims, or difficult claims, have been buffered by the, more than $3 million now set aside in the PFA. So, that's allowed us to buffer that.
Could you want to explain a little more exactly what PFA is for newer members?
I'll do my best.
No, please.
Yes.
And why the insurance companies don't like it?
Sure. So the PFA, we're basically buying a higher deductible plan at a lower cost, and then reinsuring to make up the difference and bring the deductible down for a better benefit for our employees. And so that secondary, that reinsurance is a participating funding agreement, and we do so through a company called RSI, Reimbursements Specialist Incorporated. And that allows us to set our health insurance rate at a number that we feel is appropriate for having an adequate buffer to make sure we can pay the bills and the claims, but also to generate a surplus. So it's almost like generating a little bit of free cash within the health insurance budget. And what happens is, at the end of the year, the claims are more favorable than we expected. We may generate a significant surplus. And I think everyone here knows in October, we go to town meeting, we transfer that into a stabilization fund specifically for health insurance. If we had a more challenging year, we may not generate as much in a surplus, and so it might be a smaller transfer. On wood, every year we've been able to transfer something, and it's usually been more than $175,000, I think, and some years, the first year's up to $400,000. So it's really about moving risk, and trying to take a little bit of risk with the secondary insurance policy, but also being able to, with the employees, because not just the town, there's a portion of the premium paid by the employees as well. That money's being set aside for any future spikes that in premium that were unanticipated.
The insurance companies don't like it because that profit
We keep it.
is usually theirs
Yeah, we keep it.
rather than ours. And again, it's a 70-30 split with the taxpayers. It's we pay, the municipality pays 70% of the premiums, the employees pay 30%, so 30% of whatever the savings is. And it's also retained in the PFA account. But it is a return to the employees. It's just a shared cost and shared benefits, and then allocated out appropriately.
Just say, I think it's one of the greatest things we've done. If I'm not mistaken, though, if the PFA were to go away, the percentage we're talking about is to give us a similar deductible program that we have now, whereas if that wasn't there, couldn't we be entertaining a much higher increase to get anything close to that?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
That would be the big sticker shock for employees.
Right, so we're not going to go to, if we were moving away from the PFA, we wouldn't be taking our low deductible, our higher deductible plan and asking for both. We would need to ask for a lower deductible plan, and that's something that's negotiated between the town and the employees, so we don't just get to the phone and make that change. So that's a risk that goes with that for sure. And that the market is shrinking, because I think everybody knows. The carrier that I'm referring to that was really interested in that ended up not being was United Healthcare. New to municipal coverage in Massachusetts, we were very aggressive. And then, not even 12 months later, had no interest in the town, which was really sort of strange and concerning too. When you make that type of a move, and then they don't want you, it's very disruptive for not just the employees, but for the
If I remember
administration.
correctly, when they first approached, it was very late in the process, and that's why we couldn't
Yeah.
really go through.
We used it as some leverage to try to get a better price out of Blue Cross, but to make that type of a transition at that point would have
They
been
came
very
in
challenging.
April, May, as opposed to February.
I recall being in it. Yeah, we need to be signed on. We have a notice period. We have to give employees for change under federal law. So
Why was that shift then? Why suddenly with a lack of interest?
I think they were experimenting, in my opinion. I think they were blaming claims, but the claims were challenging the year before. I think there was a business model change that they were looking at and maybe decided they didn't want to look at it.
Can we talk about the life cycle of free cash, and although either one of you two could probably do a better job tonight, talk through it and see
Sure.
if I've got it right?
Yeah.
So the fiscal year ends on June 30th. The next couple months, you're adding up all the numbers, what came in, what revenue was, what the expenses were, and basically what is the difference? How much extra money came in than what we spent, hopefully. So you determine that number is $3 million, you report it to the state, at some point the state agrees, certifies it, as you say, they certify free cash at $3 million, hopefully.
They make their own calculation.
They make their own calculation. So hopefully it agrees with what you say, but anyway,
Right.
they come out with a number and they certify it, and then it's available for the town to spend. Typically, we will begin spending that money in October, town meeting, smaller to a lesser extent, to satisfy some end of year or beginning of year things that where we need to transfer money or take care of prior year bills or any of those little things.
Mhm.
We might spend it on a special town meeting if something comes up, but mostly it gets spent at the June town meeting, maybe for capital projects, other one-time costs, quote unquote, and then in the rest, anything that we don't spend goes into various stabilization.
So yes, we try to make sure that every dollar is accounted for and appropriated, even if only to stabilization funds. And sometimes you'll see we've made a transfer in an odd number, and it's because we're rounding out to get to zero.
Yep.
And it's a sort of a protective act, meaning that, we don't make that calculation, the Department of Revenue does. We don't want there to be hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars of taxpayer money not safely in an account, and, again, we would, if there was a problem and our free cash was not what we expected, we'd need to address that either way, and it might involve a town meeting action. But we always felt that it would be best to have all the money accounted for. The place that we end up going to is a stabilization.
So at the end of June town meeting, typically every dollar that was left over from the prior year has been allocated or spent.
Correct.
And then we sort of,
Correct.
so it doesn't build up. At least we're trying to avoid, we're trying to keep it from building up. If we had 3 million in free cash last year and 2 million this year, we're not going to end up with 5 million, based on what we do.
Correct. Based on how we.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Even if we didn't, it closes out, goes back to your fund balance, and then gets recertified the next year. You can't just like.
It still has the restrictions of free cash. It doesn't become, available cash, openly.
And it cannot be expended anywhere but at a town meeting through an appropriation.
Exactly. So that.
Yeah, that was a good description. I think you said revenue in excess of what we planned for, and expenses that maybe didn't match up, but were not as much as was appropriated. So departments didn't spend as much. Those two things are what are really driving this. I mean, we were hoping, to certainly, first and foremost, we first started as a financial planning team, we started talking about having this meeting. The idea was to really just review for people, especially those who maybe had not been part of the budget process or not had the opportunity to hear this in this forum, review how the budget's formulated. Give a little bit of information about where we see things headed for fiscal year 2026, and both the superintendent and I and the assistant superintendent and finance director are working with the respective budgets to come to a final budget proposal that will be forwarded to the school committee, select board, and finance committee, probably about a month or so from now, right, based on the timing. But really what we hoped is, to the extent that there may be any other questions, or that there may be a desire to have discussion, that this, could provide that opportunity outside of what normally is a very, more strained conversation. We're talking about a specific budget deficit, trying to balance the budget. So we just wanted to provide this as a forum for both questions and discussion, not just to us, but amongst the group, and perhaps maybe through the extent it's warranted. Or not. Tim.
What are we using as the definition of level services?
So I'll speak for
For both municipal and schools.
Sure. So I'll speak for municipal departments, and that is to take the services that we are or will be offering on June 30th, 2024, and continuing doing so on July 1st, 2025. And so that generally will involve the same level of staffing. It will generally involve similar expense numbers. The variable that we've encountered is with the fire department budget, as we've seen changes in the nature of the callback system that we rely on. So I think everybody knows, we made a determination that in order to keep providing the community the same level of service it's been providing, we needed to actually hire additional firefighters. So, but that's the definition we're using from a municipal standpoint. I'll defer to the superintendent for schools.
For our side, it's the services we have this year, no restoration of any of the cuts from last year, and nothing additional. Other than maybe what would be an enrollment-driven change or programmatic.
That's correct.
I don't think we had any.
And I don't think we have any.
Right. So we're looking
Typical,
at,
the definition has it for next year.
we would typically look at enrollment and see the changes in populations between grade levels and what that driver would be. If there's a staffing reduction or an addition because of the changes. It's pretty stable over each level. So next year there's no enrollment-driven adjustments due to a level services budget. So as Dr. Daly said, we're looking at current staffing levels that we have this school year into next year. No restoration of any of the reductions to balance fiscal 25 budget. So essentially same level, same amount of services, same programs, same staffing, same offerings to students that we have this year. As of the last day of school this year, we'll carry into next next school year.
And on the municipal side, are there any increases in any of the expense budgets? I know, I'm assuming most are driven by salaries.
The salaries are a component.
Did you allow for any increase in expense line items?
To the extent that it was required to maintain certain level services, yes. So one example would be sanitation. Our contractual trash expenses for both vendors are going to go up. So that's one area, and it's going to require a discussion about the fee as well as we're heading into fiscal year 2026.
So I'm assuming things like town clerk for postage, you increase that where applicable.
To the
those types
extent
of
that it
things.
was required to maintain services, yes. And Lorianne has seen the budgets more closely than I have. We'll be meeting with department heads over the next couple of weeks, but she hasn't, I don't know if you want to speak to what you've seen.
Sam's went up, Lorianne.
Across the board, the departments were very good. They sharpened their pencils. If they felt they needed an increase in one area, they really tried hard to reduce in other areas. The biggest increases, again, were contractual increases and certain things like the trash hauling and a few other things that were more or less unavoidable that they were caught, just increased costs to either vendors or that type of thing. Our level services right now, we did that 3.58 did not include new firefighters. That's close to another half a million. Put that in level services right now.
Although that is a request that did come in for
Right.
additional flex, on the floor that we hired. So we're going to have to.
That's not in here.
What's that?
That's not.
That is not.
So, because last year I think there was a lot of confusion on level services and there was a slightly different definition used, but it sounds like we're starting off with the same definition this year. I felt like last year there were slightly different definitions of level services between the schools and the municipal.
Could you elaborate?
Yeah.
I think we were looking at an outcome. It sounds like we essentially kept the same staffing combined on the school side, the same staffing. The cuts remained from last year. Municipal side, but last year on the school side, I think there was a 2 FTE increase based on enrollment.
Yeah, well,
Right,
yes,
but that's something we're not
we
accounting.
always presented two budgets though.
Right.
So we had a level services, and then we had what we would refer to modified, which was some what we would consider minor increases, enhancements driven by our strategic plan, and I think there was a couple add-ons to that, which was above level services, but that was the difference that we presented.
The reason why it's not this year is just because the numbers don't dictate it. I mean, if there was more students needed, level services would be an addition of a position. It just, the way the numbers are this year, it doesn't require that.
Just on this subject then, on the municipal side, are all contracts, or at least all major contracts settled within there, or is there a budget salary set aside?
So there's one unsettled contract for fiscal year 20,
One for 25, and then two would go into 26.
So the library union is unsettled for this current fiscal year for negotiations right now, tenants beginning July 1st.
But small numbers of employees.
So police lieutenants are 3 employees, but they are higher wages. The library is, I think, is it 18 or 20 that are represented? 20, yeah. So 20 members. A number of them are part-time employees, so the wages are not quite as excessive.
Yeah.
Well, it was 20 with the substitute, so permanent employees,
The major union, the major contracts are settled.
Yeah.
Going into the new fiscal year.
And they were settled over the summer after the June
Yeah,
town.
that was a big question mark in the budget last year, because I had a question about that.
And we have, similar to the experience the school committee had, wages were an issue. It was a pressure point. We had sort of the ability to enact a more modest, but not necessarily modest, rollover set of contracts. But for 2 of the unions, police and fire, we had a number of initiatives that were costly, including changes that we needed to place for the appropriate staffing. So there is an expense in it, but it is factored into the numbers that we see here. You're going to see a significant decrease in the salary reserve from what we've seen in previous years. We had 2 years worth, I think, right, in last year's.
yes, but also unsettled.
So that's going to really start to sort of iron itself out, level itself out, hopefully. Jen?
What is the state aid formula? Is it by population of town, or how do we know what we're getting?
So the unrestricted general government aid number, which is flat right now, but will probably end up increasing that 1 to approaching 2% range. I can't say that I know the formula, or I'm not sure who knows the formula, but we tend to see a percentage increase that is usually pretty uniform across communities. There might be some variance between towns and cities. The city may get a smaller number, may get a large number, just depends upon the whims. The Chapter 70 is a little more defined. We know we have this sort of floor, I guess, right now for that increase that I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. You start with that as a baseline.
Right, so the Chapter 70 state aid formula, it's many variables kind of go into it to define what that would mean for North Reading. But because of where we stand with that formula, we sort of know we've been able to predict what to expect because we sort of default to the minimum aid per pupil. But it's the biggest factors are enrollment, your foundation enrollment, the students you're financially responsible for, what the inflationary factor is. They're looking to, obviously, the makeup of the community and the revenue growth factor, median income, and property values, and so forth. That all drives the formula. But because of where we stand and the fact that the eyes of the formula were sort of above where our amount, what the state wants us to be receiving, we're above our minimum aid amount, we're going to default to the amount that the governor in the state through the budget process sets per pupil, that minimum aid amount, which has been generally funded, somewhere in the range of $30 per pupil. So we can look at our foundation enrollment, which we can predict and know, and then multiply by 30 and pretty much expect that we're going to receive an increase in the range of about $65,000 to $66,000 a year, and that's what's reflected here.
As a baseline.
As a baseline.
And then hopefully,
With the unrestricted, there isn't a set formula for it?
I'm not familiar with it if there is. I mean, my experience has been, it tends to be, there's a bucket of money they put into it and it gets allocated pretty uniformly amongst communities, but we can certainly look further into that.
Okay, I was just wondering, other communities of similar population, are they receiving similar amounts?
So from my conversation with my colleagues, the year-over-year change is usually pretty similar, but sometimes there will be an outlier. And it was either Linfield or Wakefield one year, for some reason, got a little bit more. They didn't get the same percentage everyone else, and I never got an answer as to why.
Okay.
But that, there is an allocation that does happen there, but we can certainly try to find out more about that. Yeah.
Can we go back to municipal revenue offsets? Is that the pay-as-you-throw?
Yes.
I was just wondering why that was blank.
So we don't have a projection that we've worked in as a revenue stream right now. People are using the program, although not huge numbers as I understand it. By the time we come closer to finalizing the budget, we may have, and certainly by the time we're talking about a fee, we're going to have a better grasp of how we're willing to project that. It's just been very challenging to try to actually project the number. I don't know if we're able to say that.
Yeah, what it is the funds don't come to us from the residents. It's only the stores that are buying the bags from us.
They buy
So-
the bag, that's.
Right, and then they sell, and then they replenish their supply. So what happened was they bought them up front.
Yeah.
So I think 2024, we sold like 12,000 more. But then in the first half of 25 so far, we've only sold 2,500. So residents are not buying as many from stores, or that whatever supply they initially bought lasted longer than they thought.
So do we need to be advertising that, getting that out there?
We could certainly do more, and I'm sure it'll get highlighted as we talk about the fee. We tried to work it into our holiday messaging too, to just remind folks that the bags are out there. There's a balancing act too with the, with the provider, to sort of make sure that they are enforcing the limitation as well.
Right.
Not that they aren't, but sometimes they do need to be reminded to do so.
Just love talking about trash, don't you?
Yeah. I'm talking trash.
On the revenue side, on the local receipts, under motor vehicle excise, there's currently an interest. Are those late payments from residents? 225,000?
That's penalties, yes, that's penalties and interest on all, like real estate motor vehicle, not anything that's enterprise, but, yeah, personal property, yes.
So does that mean we have, I don't know, like a collection problem, like late payments? Like if we send out $100,000 of bills, then that suggests that we're not getting, like on February 1st, we're not getting $100,000 worth of everyone paying their bills.
No, there's always an unpaid amount, but generally, like if it's unpaid by June 30th, then we need it the following year on the next year's tax bill, like trash, water, those get liened. And then eventually, if the real estate tax is unpaid, it does go into tax title. But
So it just is what it is.
yeah, we send out demands, we put things like motor vehicle bills, we put them on warrant. They're marked at the registry, so the resident can't get, their license or re-register the vehicle or that type of thing. We do everything we can, but, yeah, there's always late payments.
The biggest ones are real estate driven, and they're the same cast of characters every year. It's the same laundry list of people that just don't pay their taxes on time, real estate taxes on time, that's the biggest driver, and it's the same people.
Is there like a percentage? Like 10% of the community
I
doesn't pay, or
have
what?
to review it, I don't know it off the top of my head, yeah. The treasurer would know better, but I don't know right now. I don't want to say a number that I'm not sure.
And then on the other financing sources, it says special revenue funds such as cell tower revenue.
Yep.
And then on the sources, it says a transfer from the cell tower account. Is there a reason you don't like discount that as, I guess, revenue? Like how does that work?
It's the type of account that it is. DOR dictated to us how we had to handle cell tower revenue, so it had to go in what's called a receipts reserve. You have to reserve it, and it has to be appropriated. So they designated what type of account the cell tower had to be. I wasn't fully part of why it had to be that way, but
It's still a mystery to me because they came after us, I think it was 16 years after we started
started using
spending
it.
the funds, and so we corrected it at town meeting, I think 2 years ago. They sort of, out of left field, said you need to create a stabilization fund, which we did. We needed a legislative action, I think.
Yeah, so it's not like an estimated receipts, it's a receipts reserve that is treated like a transfer.
And keep in mind, these are leases that we have, so it's a little bit different than forecasting. There's a payment that must be made based on the terms.
So the money comes into the reserve account
Right.
from the lease,
Yes.
and then it just gets allocated.
It stays there until we allocate.
Until you allocate, but it does get allocated. It's just a pipeline.
Yeah, rather than it be treated as a general fund revenue, it's
It's
separated.
an accounting, really, but the town has to allocate it separately.
Right, but we couldn't, you need authorization from the state to do that with a revenue stream, which is again what we saw in the news 2 years ago.
So is that the cell tower thing that they were talking about, the select board meeting on Monday night?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
That's one component of this. There are also cell towers on our water towers too. Any other questions, or? I'm sure this will be the first of additional meetings that we'll have, at least when we know we're getting closer on the budget. Financial planning team is scheduled to meet again in early February. For anyone who doesn't know, we have a special town meeting on Monday, January 27th. I urge folks to attend here. There is a quorum requirement, so it's really important that residents get there and we meet that quorum required number.
Can you please explain that for some people who can never attend?
It's a great question. So outside
There are no quorum requirements,
All right.
if there is no special meeting.
Correct. Our charter does not require, our charter and bylaws do not require presence of a quorum or a minimum number of attendees to conduct business at either the June or the October meeting. For a special meeting, there is a quorum requirement, a minimum number, and blank, is it 200 that we have? 150. 150 voters need to be present at the meeting for this special meeting. The reason we're having a special meeting is that we're trying to conduct and get in place a zoning bylaw amendment ahead of a state law that goes into effect on February 2nd relative to accessory dwelling units. So we've urged folks to the extent that they can to attend town meeting on January 27th at 7 o'clock. Your warrant's going to have additional information in it. It's going to have information about accommodations for folks with disabilities, about transportation specifically for seniors and about childcare for folks as well. So we're really hoping to get to that quorum number and be able to conduct our business. And it's not as if we could just call another town meeting for that purpose because we're up against the deadline. Less than
We can call another town meeting, but in the meantime, people will be able to take advantage of the state law until we are able to pass more restrictive regulations.
correct.
It really is not a joke, because a number of years ago, Steve, you probably remember this, we did not have a quorum, and everybody was on their phones calling and getting people to try and come in. And that was one of the reasons why most special town meetings that we have now are an adjunct to a regular town meeting, so that we know we're going to have.
Great. All right. That concludes the presentation for this evening. I appreciate everybody's attendance on a cold night. Thanks very much.